The medicine smelled like wet iron and old regret. Tal Hart knew this because Lyra had described it that way, at length, with the particular eloquence of a 7-year-old who had decided that if she was going to be sick, she was going to be thoroughly sick, and that the medicine was the worst part, and everyone should know it. She had said wet iron and old regret, and then looked at him with the solemn authority of someone who had just coined a phrase and was waiting for it to be acknowledged. He had acknowledged it, he was good at that. The colonial medic had sent them to the keep's lower ward for a chest compress. Something about altitude and Valdris's atmospheric pressure affecting human respiratory infections differently than the colony's baseline settings had accounted for. Tal had wrapped Lyra in her yellow scarf, the one she refused to leave quarters without because it had been Anna's and still smelled like her, if you pressed it to your face on the right kind of day. And he had carried her up the long stone path to Moonfang Keep, as the 3 moons rose behind it like an audience settling in for something. He had not wanted to come to the keep. He had not wanted to come to Valdris at all, originally, but Anna had already packed when she told him about the posting, which was how he knew it was not a conversation so much as a courtesy. She had her white coat folded over the top of the case, and her eyes bright with the particular light she got when a problem was interesting enough to be worth everything else. He had said what about the tomatoes, which was a stupid thing to say, but he was a gardener and the tomatoes were just coming in and his mind went to what it knew. She had laughed. She had kissed him on the temple. She had said, "You can grow tomatoes anywhere, Tal. There is only one Valdris." She had been right about that, at least. The keep's lower ward was a drafty corridor of stone benches and medicinal smells. The Valdrin who worked there, enormous, efficient, professionally indifferent to the small human and his smaller daughter, had given Lyra a vial of something brown and suggested they wait while the chest compress was prepared. The vial smelled, as Lyra immediately identified, of wet iron and old regret. Tal held the cup and looked at his daughter on his lap. Her nose was red. Her eyes were the tired, overbright eyes of a child running a manageable fever that was nonetheless making her miserable in the thorough, committed way she brought to most things. "It is going to taste terrible," Lyra announced, eyeing the cup with the wariness of a diplomat reading a treaty for hidden clauses. "Yes," Tal agreed. "That's how you know it's working." "That's not how that works. Medically speaking, that's not how that works, duh." He looked at the cup. He looked at his daughter. She had Anna's eyes, which was the kind of thing he usually didn't let himself notice directly, because noticing it directly cost more than he could budget on a Tuesday. He noticed it anyway. He was getting worse at not noticing. "Okay," Tal said, setting the cup on the bench beside him. "I guess it's gone." Lyra blinked. "Gone." Vanished. He held up both hands, empty, and spread them. Completely disappeared. One of those medical mysteries. The corner of Lyra's mouth moved. She was trying not to let it. "That's not." "Where did it go?" Tal covered his face with both hands. "Where's Tal? Where did Tal go?" Duh, but she was smiling now, the misery retreating behind the helpless amusement she brought to his particular brand of silliness. She had inherited Anna's mind and Tal's sense of humor, which Anna had always said was either the best or worst possible combination depending on the day. "Peekaboo," he dropped his hands, made the face, eyes wide, expression baffled, as though he too was surprised to find himself here, and in the moment of her laugh he brought the cup to her lips. She swallowed before she registered what had happened. The laugh curdled into an accusatory stare. "You did that on purpose." "I have no idea what you're referring to." "You are the worst." "The best," he corrected, tucking the empty cup behind him. "I am the best. Now lean against me and let the wet iron and old regret do its work." She leaned against him, still mock indignant, and he pulled her close and looked at the corridor wall and didn't think about Anna, which was another thing he was getting worse at. He noticed the glass partition because Lyra had gone drowsy against his shoulder, and he had nothing to do with his eyes. It separated the waiting area from a sterile corridor that led, he gathered from the directional carvings above the arch, toward the upper residential levels of the keep. The glass was thick, slightly warped with age, the kind that made everything on the other side look like a memory of itself rather than the thing directly. Through it, he could see a stretch of inner corridor lit by moon crystal sconces, and in that corridor, pressed against the far wall, something small. Tal leaned forward slightly. It was a child. A Valdrin child, small for the species, 3 years old at most, her silver-tipped fur matted with sweat, Her skin flushed the deep violet he had learned to associate with moon fever from the colony health briefings. Her eyes were the blown-out gold of a fever cresting. She was crouched against the wall in the particular posture of an animal that has been in pain for too long, not aggressive, just enduring, her face pressed to the cool glass as though the temperature of it was the only relief available. She was looking at Lyra, not at Tal, at Lyra who had just laughed. The child's expression was difficult to read, fever-blurred and fever-wild, the instinctive aggression of a Valdrin cub in crisis running just under the surface. But something in the laugh had snagged her. She was still, not the stillness of a predator calculating, the stillness of something distracted from its pain by a sound it had never heard before. Tal looked at Lyra, then back at the cub. He did not think about what he was doing. He did not calculate. He raised his hands and covered his face. "Where's Tal?" he said quietly to the partition. Lyra, half asleep, murmured not this again. The cub on the other side of the glass went absolutely still. Tal waited. He could feel the quality of the attention through the glass, not imagined, something real, a change in the pressure of the moment. He dropped his hands. "Peekaboo." He smiled. Not a bared-teeth smile, not the aggressive display that the Valdrin used as warning. A soft smile, the kind that meant "I see you and I am glad to see you," which was the only kind he had ever really been able to do convincingly. The cub blinked. Her tail, which had been rigid with pain, dropped an inch. Behind her, in the corridor's shadow, a figure that had been standing very still for a very long time began to move. The summons came while Lyra was sleeping. 2 Imperial guards, enormous even by Valdrin standards, armor engraved with the keep's sigil, faces wearing the professional blankness of men accustomed to delivering messages that were not negotiable. A servant behind them, pale and apologetic in the way of people who have been told to soften something that cannot be softened. "Tal Hart." He stood automatically, putting himself between the guards and his sleeping daughter. "Yes, did I do something?" "The Emperor requests your presence." The Tal looked at Lyra. "She's sleeping, she's sick, I can't." "She comes too," the guard said. The Emperor was specific. He looked at the 2 guards. He looked at the servant, who offered a small, helpless gesture that communicated sympathy without offering any practical assistance. He looked at Lyra, who had Anna's eyes and was asleep with her yellow scarf pulled up to her chin and knew nothing yet of what was about to change. He picked her up. She stirred, settled against his shoulder without fully waking, her small hand finding the collar of his jacket and holding it. He followed the guards. The nursery of the 3 moons was not what he had expected. He had expected austere. He had expected the cold grandeur of everything else in the keep, stone and crystal, and the particular aesthetic of a civilization that had decided severity was a virtue and decorated accordingly. What he found was a room that was trying to be austere and failing under the pressure of what was happening inside it. The glass dome above let in the full weight of Valdris's 3 moons. The walls were carved with protective runes in deep red pigment. The cribs were ironwood, beautiful and hard. And in the cribs, 2 children were burning. Tal had read the colony briefings on moon fever. He had read them the way he read most things on Valdris, thoroughly, carefully, with the slightly detached thoroughness of a man who was trying to understand a world he had not entirely chosen to be in. He had understood it as a theoretical condition, seeing it was different. The twins were 3 years old. They looked simultaneously ancient and entirely fragile, their eyes blown out to solid gold, their skin moving through colors that human skin had no equivalent for, their small bodies arching against something internal that had no outside. Standing in the shadow near the far wall, a figure that made the room feel smaller by virtue of his presence. The Wolf Emperor did not look like what Tal had imagined. He looked like a father. That was the thing that hit first. Before the size, before the scars, before the mane of white and black and the eyes that caught moonlight like polished coin. He looked like a father in the specific way of a man who had run out of solutions and was standing in the ruins of his certainty. Tal recognized it. He had worn that expression for 6 months after Anna. He saw it now in someone who could have crushed him with one hand, and it made the enormous room feel very small and very human. "You are the gardener," Drav said. His voice was a subsonic thing felt as much as heard, who plays the vanishing game. Tal Hart, he managed not to squeak. It was a near thing. It's not a game, exactly. It's something I do with Lyra for her. She doesn't like medicine either. The princess stopped her fever cry when you did it, Drav said, for 6 minutes. The longest she has been quiet in 2 days. She was just distracted, Tal said. That's all it is. Distraction. You hide, you reappear, it interrupts the distress pattern. Infants and toddlers don't have full object permanence yet, which means when something disappears, they can't be certain it's coming back, and when it comes back. Do it, Drav said. Tal stopped, I'm sorry. The healer, Drav gestured to a Valdrin woman near the medicine table, white robes, silver-tipped fur brushed to a precision that communicated everything about her relationship to chaos. She was looking at Tal with the expression of a surgeon watching a patient attempt to perform their own operation. She has tried every method available to us. They reject the silver. Without it, they will not see morning. Drav held Tal's gaze. You will do the vanishing game. She will administer the medicine. If it works, you will explain why. And if it doesn't? If it does not work, Drav said, then we have lost nothing that we were not already losing. Tal looked at the twins. He looked at Lyra, still drowsy on his shoulder, her yellow scarf trailing. He set her down on the cold stone floor gently. She curled against the nearest crib leg and went back to sleep with the unconscious trust of a child who had never had reason to doubt that the floor was safe. He sat down beside her. He was not comfortable. The floor was cold and his knees were the wrong side of 35, and the Wolf Emperor was watching him with the intensity of a man watching the last boat leaving a burning shore. The healer, he would learn her name was Vess, stood at the edge of his peripheral vision with a silver spoon and the expression of someone prepared to be professionally disappointed. He looked at the boy twin, Rowan's equivalent, the source child. The boy was panting, saliva at the corners of his jaw, claws dug into the ironwood of his crib, eyes entirely gold and entirely animal. Hey, Tal said softly, tough night, huh? The boy hissed. Tal raised his hands. He covered his face. The darkness behind his own palms was warm and smelled of garden soil and Lyra's shampoo. He thought, you're all right. You're here. I'm here. Nothing is gone that isn't coming back. He felt the quality of the room change. Even Vess had gone still. He dropped his hands. Peekaboo. The boy blinked. The gold in his eyes flickered, not much, not long, but real. His claws loosened 1 degree from the wood. He was confused. His predator brain had been tracking a threat, and the threat had vanished and reappeared somewhere it didn't expect, and in the processing pause between those two states, something else was briefly possible. Tal looked at Vess. She moved. The spoon was at the boy's lips before the processing pause could close. The boy's mouth opened not to bite, not in refusal, but in the automatic response of surprise, and the medicine went in. The room was silent for 3 full seconds. Then the boy made a face of such extravagant disgust that Tal, despite everything, felt a laugh move through his chest. He swallowed it, but the laugh had been real, and something about its residue, the warmth of it, the involuntary human realness of it, seemed to reach the boy even suppressed. The boy looked at Tal, not at the spoon, not at Vess, at Tal. Again the boy said, barely a word, more syllable than language, but unmistakable. From somewhere above him, Tal heard a sound he had not heard in this room since he arrived. Emperor Drav, the Wolf Emperor, the man who wore the weight of a dying empire in his shoulders, exhaled. It was not a word, it was not a command. It was just breath released from somewhere very deep, the sound of a man discovering that the ground was still there. Tal covered his face again. The girl twin was watching from her crib with the sharp, assessing focus of someone who had just seen something she intended to understand completely. He dropped his hands. Peekaboo. They kept him until both twins were dosed and quiet, and the particular volcanic tension of the room had subsided to something merely serious. Lyra woke up during the second round and watched her father play the game with the wolf cubs with the expression of a child observing something she had always known to be true being confirmed for the first time by outside evidence. They like it, she said, to no one in particular. Everyone likes it, Tal said, not looking away from the girl twin who was watching his hands with total concentration. That's the whole point. When it was done, both twins dosed, both twins quiet, both twins looking at Tal with the particular gaze of creatures that had found an anchor and were not planning to let it drift. Drav crossed the room and stood over him. Tal stood, his knees made a sound. You will stay, Drav said. The fever returns with the moon cycle, 3 nights minimum. After that, we reassess. I have a job, Tal said. I have a house, I have. You have a daughter who needs to see a doctor, Drav said, and I have a doctor. You have gardens that need tending, and I have gardeners who will tend them. You have nothing that cannot be managed except the thing that you do, which cannot be managed by anyone but you. The Emperor's eyes held a quality that Tal was beginning to identify as their version of please, not the word, never the word, but the weight beneath the command that acknowledged the weight of the ask. My children are dying, Tal Hart. You are the only variable that has changed. Tal looked at Lyra. She was standing next to the girl twin's crib. The girl twin had reached a small, clawed hand through the bars. Lyra, with the total fearlessness of someone who had not yet been informed that this was inadvisable, had taken it. Okay, Tal said, to the floor, to the moons through the dome, to Anna specifically, who had put him here and was therefore in some sense responsible for what was happening. Okay. But Lyra needs soft pillows, and if you have anything in this fortress that approximates hot chocolate, you will have mountains of it, Drav said, with a solemnity that suggested he had never been more serious about anything in his reign. Mountains, Tal repeated. Mountains. Tal looked at his daughter, still holding the feverish claw of a wolf princess through the bars of an ironwood crib, and thought, Anna, you absolute architect. He picked up his bag. He followed the guards deeper into the keep. Behind him, the moons turned slowly above the glass dome, and the twins breathed in their cribs, and the healer Vess stood very still at her medicine table, watching the doorway through which the human had just walked, her silver spoon still in her hand, her expression doing something it was not accustomed to doing. Something that looked very precisely like recalculation. 7 days passed the way difficult things sometimes do, one small indignity at a time, each one survivable, the accumulation of them less so. Tal established a routine because routine was what he knew. He was a gardener. He understood that things grew or died based on the consistency of their conditions, and that the most important thing you could do for a struggling organism was to make its environment predictable. He applied this to the twins with the same pragmatic attention he had applied to the medicinal plots, and if the Wolf Emperor's head healer found this comparison professionally offensive, she had chosen not to say so yet. Every evening as the first moon crested the mountain ridge, Tal walked the torchlit corridor to the nursery. The guards nodded. Not warmly, the Valdrin did not do warmth as a resting state, but with the particular acknowledgement of men who had watched something work when nothing else had and were adjusting their priors accordingly. He was the human who made the prince drink. It was not a title he had applied for. It appeared to be the one he had. The ritual was always the same. Vess would be waiting, her white robes impeccable at any hour, her medicine preparation treated with the ceremony of a religious rite. She measured. She crushed. She chanted in the low register that made the air develop texture. Then Tal would sit on the floor and he would cover his face, and the twins would stop their low-level growling, and Vess would administer, and the medicine would stay down. It worked. That was the undeniable fact. That was also the problem, because working meant staying, and staying meant looking at the keep every morning and knowing he was still here, still on Valdris, still in the world Anna had chosen and then left him alone in. On the 4th night, he decided the room was wrong. He said it to Vess, which was not the careful political calculation it should have been. He said it because it was 300, and he was sitting on the stone floor between the cribs, and the thought arrived fully formed, and he said it before he had run the risk assessment. It's too quiet in here, he said. Vess looked up from her chart. She had the expression she frequently wore around him, the expression of a person with 50 years of specialized expertise watching someone with no relevant credentials prepare to have an opinion. Quiet is necessary, she said, for stabilization of the aura field. It's depressing, Tal said. He looked around the room, the bare stone walls. The protective runes in their deep red pigment, which he had decided on first viewing, looked less like comfort and more like a warning label. The ironwood cribs, magnificent, cold. The only sound the distant wind through the ventilation slots in the rock. This room feels like a waiting area for something bad. These are toddlers. They need. The princes must be raised in strength, Vess said, with the tone of someone reciting from a document. Softness compromises the development of the instinct hierarchy. The instinct hierarchy, Tal said, is currently trying to kill them. Vess's ears moved. He had learned to read the ears. That particular movement was not agreement, but it was not the flat refusal either. It was the movement of someone filing an argument they had not expected to find difficult to counter. I'm the keeper of play, Tal said. That's what the guards are calling me. Drav used the phrase yesterday. If that's the title, then I need an environment that supports play, and this room, he looked at the deep red runes, at the ironwood, at the stone walls bare except for the severity of everything on them. This room is not that. The Emperor would not permit. The Emperor wants them to survive, Tal said. He surprised himself with the steadiness of it. Everything else is secondary to that. And I'm telling you, as the person who sits on this floor every night and watches them sleep, that they are tense even when they're unconscious. They're gripping their blankets. They're tracking sounds in their sleep. This environment is keeping their nervous systems in a state of low-level threat response, and a nervous system in threat response cannot heal. It can only endure. Vess looked at him for a long moment. You have no formal training, she said. I have a 7-year-old daughter and a very bad first year after her mother died, Tal said. I know what it looks like when a small person is not safe enough to stop being afraid. The silence after that was different from the silence before it. It had weight in it. Not the weight of disagreement, the weight of recognition, which was heavier and more uncomfortable. Vess did not say he was right. She also did not say he was wrong. She returned to her chart, which was her version of permission. He started the next morning. The modifications were not dramatic. He was a gardener, not a decorator, and what he understood was function rather than aesthetic. He brought blankets from the human quarters, quilts stitched in yellow and blue, washed in the colony detergent that smelled of nothing identifiable, just clean in the way that clean things smelled when they weren't competing with musk and cured leather and the sharp organic heaviness of Valdrin domestic spaces. He replaced the iron rattles with a soft-furred animal Lyra had outgrown. She had named it Biscuit, and then revised the name to Commander Biscuit, and then eventually stopped playing with it, which was how it was available. He found a second stuffed thing in the colony supply exchange, a fabric rabbit with button eyes, and added it to the crib without ceremony. Vess watched him from the doorway with the focused attention of a scientist, observing an uncontrolled variable. That is a fire hazard, she said, as he draped a soft cotton panel across one side of the ironwood crib to block a draft he had identified on the third night. It's fire-retardant cotton, Tal said, which was approximately true in that he believed it to be true and had not specifically verified it. He stepped back and looked at the girl twin. She had been watching the installation of the fabric panel with the alert, cautious interest of a creature encountering a new object and assessing it for threat. Now, in the experimental half-second of assessment that preceded either acceptance or rejection, she reached out one small fist and grabbed the corner of the yellow quilt. She rubbed it against her cheek. Her claws retracted. The retraction was not slow or effortful. It was automatic, the body's response to a signal it had been waiting for, a texture that was not threat, was not dominance, was not the complex sensory language of wolf hierarchy. It was simply soft. It smelled like nothing. It asked nothing of her. She sighed. It was a small sound. Tal had to work to hear it. He looked at Vess. Vess was looking at the crib. She crossed the room in 3 strides and stood beside him, looking at the girl twin with the quilt. Her hand reached out, slow, careful, and touched the cotton. Her fingers, capable of surgical precision and incidentally of crushing stone, moved across the fabric with surprising delicacy. It is flimsy, she said. Yes. She did not take it away. The music box came from his own luggage, which he had brought to the keep under the assumption that being summoned by a wolf emperor probably meant an extended stay, and he should plan accordingly. It was a small, wind-up toy, battered, the paint worn off one corner where Lyra had dropped it on the habitat floor the year they arrived. It played a version of a song he had taught Lyra during the first winter on Valdris, when the triple moons had made the nights strange and too long, and the colony's heating had not yet been calibrated for human comfort. The song was slightly out of tune. He had wound the mechanism too tight once, and it had never recovered. He set it on the low table between the cribs and wound it up. The sound cut through the nursery's heavy silence like a human voice cuts through a language it doesn't speak. Wrong, simple, impossible to pretend you hadn't heard. The boy twin sat up. His head went to the side, the involuntary tilt of a creature encountering something outside its existing categories. He was not growling. He was listening, which in a child that had been either growling or sleeping for a week was significant enough that Tal held his breath. From the doorway, a shadow shifted. He had known Drav was there for 20 minutes. The hair on the back of his neck always stood up when the Emperor was in the room, not from fear exactly, though fear was present, but from the particular physical awareness of proximity to something vastly more powerful than yourself, the same awareness that made you look up at a thunder sky before the lightning. He had pretended not to know, because pretending not to know seemed to give Drav permission to observe without the obligation to respond. And observation without response was, in Tal's experience, how a person who had always been certain began the process of becoming uncertain. Drav stepped into the light. He looked at the quilts. He looked at Commander Biscuit, who was propped in the corner of the boy's crib with the stuffed dignity of a very small general. He looked at the fabric rabbit. He listened to the music box playing its slightly damaged version of a song that had no equivalent in any Valdrin cultural tradition. "My father," Drav said, in the tone of a man accessing a memory he had not opened in a long time, was raised on granite, to harden the bone. Tal's hand stopped above the music box. "Your Majesty, I can take it." He grew up, Drav continued, looking not at Tal but at the space above his children's cribs, to be a man who bit the throat out of his own brother over a border dispute in the Eastern Reach. A pause. He called it strength. Tal did not say anything. Drav walked to the boy's crib. He moved slowly, deliberately. Tal realized, the careful containment of power reducing itself, the alpha trying to make himself smaller in the presence of something fragile. His hand descended toward the boy, large enough to hold him entirely, scarred from a dozen kinds of conflict, trembling with the specific tremor of controlled restraint. The boy reached up. He grabbed one finger. On every previous occasion, this had made the boy cry. Tal had watched it 3 times, the boy reaching, the alpha frequency overwhelming him, the contact becoming the wrong kind of contact. Tonight, surrounded by the quilt and the ridiculous stuffed animals and the damaged music box playing its out-of-tune song, the boy grabbed Drav's finger and held on. Just held on. Drav's expression did something Tal did not have the Valdrin vocabulary to name. He stood very still, his massive frame entirely suspended around the point of contact. A 7-foot emperor made motionless by the grip of a toddler who had chosen, in this moment, to hold on rather than cry. "Keep the blankets," Drav said. His voice was not quite steady. He turned and walked out. His cape moved behind him like weather. Tal looked at Vess. Vess was looking at the empty doorway. Then she looked at Tal. Her expression had the quality of someone revising a document that had seemed complete. "You are," she said finally, "infuriatingly lucky." "That's what my wife used to say." The words came out before he could edit them. She said I was the luckiest unqualified person she had ever met. Something moved through Vess's face at that, brief, careful, a question she was deciding whether to ask. She didn't ask it. She returned to her chart. The music box played its 3 repeating bars. The twins breathed. Commander Biscuit maintained his post. The nights were the hardest. After the twins were settled and Vess had dismissed him, Tal would return to the East Tower and find Lyra starfished across the center of the bed, in the way she had slept since she was 4, occupying all available space with the serene, unconscious confidence of a child who had never had reason to doubt that the bed was hers. He would sit by the window with a cup of the mudroot tea the keep provided. It was not coffee, it would never be coffee, but it was hot and it was something to hold, and he would let the silence have what it was going to take. He was a fraud. That was the voice. Not loud, not dramatic, just constant, the low-level hum of a conviction he had been carrying since Valdris and had carried long before Valdris, if he was honest, which he was generally trying not to be. Anna had been the one with the knowledge and the credentials and the light that went on behind her eyes when a problem was interesting. He was the one who knew soil pH and grew tomatoes and made their daughter laugh. The universe had sent the wrong heart to this keep, and it had simply failed to notice because Tal was very good at covering his face and appearing somewhere unexpected. "You are thinking too loud, duh." He turned. Lyra was awake, sitting up in the furs, her hair doing what it did when she slept, an architectural disaster, thoroughly her own. She was looking at him with the clear, unimpressed assessment she reserved for occasions when he was being foolish in ways she found unnecessary. "Sorry, Peanut, go back to sleep." "Tell me a story." "Which one?" She picked at the fur. "Tell me about Mum and the wolves." He was quiet for a moment. These were the hardest stories. They were also, he had come to understand, necessary in the way that hard things were sometimes necessary. Not because they felt good, but because not telling them felt worse, felt like the slow, particular dishonesty of omission. Once upon a time, he started, looking at the moons, your mum came to Valdris because there was a problem nobody else knew how to solve. She had her white coat and her case full of instruments, and the face she made when something was interesting enough to be worth everything else. The face Lyra confirmed, nodding. She wasn't afraid of anything. Not the wolves, not the keep, not the emperor. She used to say, he stopped, remembering the phrasing, she used to say that a wolf is just a patient who hasn't met the right doctor yet. And she was the right doctor. She was always the right doctor. He felt the truth of it move through him the way truths moved when you stopped arguing with them. She would look them in the eye and say, drink this or I will be very cross. And they listened because they understood she meant it. I like your way better, Lyra said. He looked at her, what? Mum's way was serious. Lyra's voice had the particular quality it got when she was saying something she had been thinking about for a while. Your way is fun. If I was sick and scared, I would want the peekaboo, not the strict lady. She wasn't, Tal started, defensive. I know she wasn't just strict. Lyra gave him the look. I know she was brilliant and brave and all of it. I'm just saying. She lay back down, pulling the fur to her chin. She saved them with the serious. You save them with the fun. A pause. You save them too, duh. You just make them laugh while you do it. She closed her eyes. He sat with the window and the moons and the mudroot tea and the words, which were going to need some time to finish moving through him. She saves them with the serious. You save them with the fun. Anna had said something like that once. Not in those words. In her words, more precise, less forgiving of sentimentality, which was how she showed love when she thought he wasn't paying attention. She had said, you know what you are? You're the thing people need after they've had me. I fix the problem, you make it bearable. He had taken that as mild at the time. He was beginning to understand it wasn't mild at all. The moonstorm came on a Tuesday, which was not a day Valdris formally observed, but which Tal had continued to track, because losing the Earth calendar had seemed, in the early months, like a bridge too far. He was in the nursery. Vess was measuring. The twins were in their post-dose quiet, the boy holding Commander Biscuit, the girl running her fingers along the edge of the yellow quilt in the repetitive, self-soothing motion she had developed since its installation. The air pressure dropped. It did not drop gradually. It dropped the way a floor drops when the supports are removed, sudden, total, the body registering the change before the mind had language for it. Tal's ears popped. The torches on the wall flared green and then turned a color he did not have a good name for, a deep bleeding red that seemed to come from inside the light rather than from any source. Outside, the wind did not howl, it screamed. Moonstorm, Vess said. She dropped the silver vial. The sound of it hitting the stone floor was very clean and very loud. It is early, 2 full cycles early. The glass dome above them shuddered. The light changed. It came through the dome in the new color, not silver, not the amber of the keep's interior, something thick and red that seemed to have physical mass, that seemed to push against the surfaces it touched. The twins woke into it. This was not waking from sleep, this was eruption. Rowan and Kaya sat up simultaneously, their backs arching in the specific, terrible way of bodies being pulled in 2 directions at once. Their jaws unhinged, slowly, then all at once, opening past what their faces should have been able to accommodate. The sound that came out of them was not a child's sound. It was something with harmonics in it, something with depth, a frequency that found the crystal veins in the walls and started them vibrating in resonance. The medicine cabinet shattered. Shield them, Tal shouted, and immediately felt absurd for shouting it at Vess, who had already thrown her hands up, a barrier of blue light erupting around the cribs. But the red light was moving through the blue like acid through paper, not fast, not instant, but definitely moving, definitely winning. What is happening? Tal got himself to the wall, putting his back against stone, looking at the room. The red moon alignment, Vess said, her voice controlled with effort, the barrier demanding visible concentration from her. The atmosphere is saturated. The feral frequency is at full resonance. It is, she stopped because the twins were changing and the change was not smooth, was not the full moon transformation of adult Valdrin, was wrong in every way a biological process could be wrong. Fur erupting in patches along their spines. Their faces trying to shift and unable to complete the shift, bones moving under the skin without resolving, a halfway state that looked like pain because it was pain. The medicine, Tal moved toward the fallen vial. Will not help, Vess's barrier flickered. The storm is too strong. They cannot hear the treatment frequency. The feral signal is drowning everything. Tal looked at the twins. He looked at the things in the cribs that were not quite children anymore but had not finished becoming something else. He looked at Rowan's face, contorted with the effort of a transformation his body was attempting, and his mind was not old enough to survive. He looked at Kaya's hands, claws extended to their full length, gripping the ironwood with enough force to leave marks in the wood. And then he saw Kaya's eyes. In the red-gold corona of the fever at its worst, in the blown-out light of a crisis older than either of their species had names for, there was something small. A point. A dot of dark brown, ordinary and terrified, the child's eyes inside the fever's eyes, present, aware, drowning. She was in there. "Hey," Tal said. He moved to the crib. The wood was hot under his hands. The heat was physical, specific, the heat of a body running a crisis that had no ceiling. "Hey," he said again, louder, "look at me." The thing that was Kaya turned. It snapped at him, fast, accurate, the instinct unmodified by any of the last 7 days' work, her teeth close enough that he felt the displacement of air on his nose. He did not pull back. He slammed his hand against the bars. Not in anger, in percussion, in the rhythm of the game, in the physical punctuation that preceded the hide. "We are playing," he said. "We are playing right now." He dropped to the floor. He covered his face. The room was chaos. The dome shuddered. The red light pressed. Vess's barrier thinned another degree. Tal could hear the storm outside, not just wind, something beneath the wind, a frequency that vibrated in the bone rather than the ear, the voice of a planet breathing out something that had been building for a long time. Behind his hands, it was dark. His own dark, his own warmth, the smell of the garden soil that had somehow become the permanent baseline of his hands regardless of how many times he washed them. He thought, "You're here, they're here. The dark behind your hands is yours." He thought, "Things that go away come back. That is the whole point. That is the only point." "Where is Tal?" He heard Vess make a sound. Not a word, a breath, an involuntary sound of someone seeing something they had no category for. He dropped his hands. "Peekaboo." The twins, both of them now, had gone still. Not the stillness of escalation. The stillness of interruption, a pattern breaching the chaos. The recognizable rhythm slicing through the frequency of the storm, the way a single instrument can cut through a full ensemble if it plays the right note at the right moment. Kaya's claws loosened on the ironwood. Rowan's arching spine dropped an inch. "It works," Vess said from somewhere behind him, her voice shaken from its clinical foundation for the first time he had heard. "Noah, don't." "Tal," he corrected automatically. "Tal, do not stop. Whatever you are doing, do not stop." I can see a pause, the pause of a healer cataloging something that didn't fit any existing file. There are spirit forms around the cribs, grief wraiths. They are feeding on the transition energy. But when you engage the twins, when they look at you, the wraiths recoil. He covered his face again. He had been in the keep 7 days. He had come to bring his daughter to a doctor. He was a gardener. He knew soil and pruning schedules and the specific song that made his daughter stop crying at 300 when the moons were wrong and the habitat was too cold. He uncovered his face. "Peekaboo." He played Got Your Nose. He played patty cake with the air between him and the cribs. He sang the song from the music box badly at the top of his voice, which was not a trained voice or a good voice, but it was entirely committed. And it was entirely present, and presence was, apparently, the thing the wraiths could not eat. He sang the wheels on the bus. He sang it while the red light ate through the last of Vess's barrier, and the dome groaned above him, and the storm tried to take the twins somewhere their 3-year-old minds could not follow and return from. He sang it for 3 hours. His throat went raw and then went past raw to a place beyond it where the voice continued on something other than moisture. His hands shook. He covered his face and uncovered his face and covered and uncovered and held the rhythm like the rhythm was the only rope between 2 points that needed to stay connected. The red light faded. The wind became wind again. The dome stopped groaning. The frequency in the bone subsided to silence. The twins collapsed, not away, toward him, falling forward against the bars of the cribs with the full weight of 3-year-olds who had been awake for longer than any 3-year-old should be awake, their bodies suddenly demanding everything that had been deferred. They were not fully children again, patches of fur still along their spines, ears still pointed, but they were breathing. They were breathing in the rhythm of sleep, slow and deep. Tal slid down the side of the crib to the floor. He sat against the ironwood with his knees up and his hands hanging, and his voice entirely gone in thought, with the clarity available only to the completely emptied, that he was very tired, and that the floor was cold, and that the twins were still alive, and that he would need to think about all of the other things later. The wipers on the bus, he whispered to no one to the room to the receding frequency of the storm. Go swish, swish, swish. The doors opened. Drav stood in the frame, drenched from the outer storm, his armor scorched at the shoulders where he had been fighting whatever the storm sent against the keep's exterior. He looked at the room. He looked at Vess, who had collapsed in the corner and was sitting against the wall with her robes rumpled for the first time in Tal's experience. He looked at the twins. He looked at Tal on the floor. He crossed the room to the cribs. He checked his children with the careful, thorough attention of a father who had been in the wrong place during the worst of it and was now conducting an accounting. They were alive. The silver markings, new, Tal noticed, patterns that had not been there before the storm, complex and faint on their skin, pulsed once and steadied. Drav turned to Vess. Report. Vess looked up from the floor. She looked at Tal. She looked back at Drav. The silver failed, she said. The barrier failed. She paused. The human fought the wraiths with a song about a mechanical transport vehicle. The Emperor's gaze moved to Tal with the specific quality of a man, recalculating the value of something he had possessed without fully appraising. The wraiths came, Drav said quietly. Yes. They were pulled toward the void. Yes. Drav was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his children sleeping, at the quilt and Commander Biscuit and the fabric rabbit, at the nursery that had been a waiting room for something bad, and was now the place where his children had survived the worst thing the planet's cycle could produce. The silver, he said, is no longer enough. His eyes settled on Tal. There is a spring, he said. In the Whisperwood, the Moonwell, he paused. It has not shown itself to a Valdrin in 100 years. Another pause longer, carrying something in it that was not the weight of command, but the weight of a fact he had been deciding whether to say. It showed itself once 2 years ago to a human. Tal looked up from the floor. He felt the cold arrive before Drav said the name. He felt it in the specific way that cold arrived when you already knew what was coming, not surprise, not shock, but the body's confirmation of what the mind had been refusing to form into words. To Anna, Drav said, the nursery was quiet. Outside, the storm had finished. The 3 moons turned above the glass dome, patient and enormous, indifferent to everything that happened beneath them and carrying it all anyway. Tal sat on the cold stone floor of a wolf emperor's nursery and heard his dead wife's name and felt the particular silence that follows the thing you did not know you had been waiting to hear. The Whisperwood did not get dark the way ordinary forests got dark. Ordinary darkness was the absence of light. This was the presence of something else, a quality that replaced light rather than simply following its withdrawal, thick and directional, pressing against the skin with the faint insistence of weather. Tal had been on Valdris for 2 years and had not once entered the Whisperwood after the first moon rose. The colony briefings had been clear on this point, which was one of the few colony briefings he had followed without finding a reason to revise. He revised it now because he did not have a choice, which was becoming the consistent mechanism of his life on this planet. Vess walked 5 paces ahead of him. She moved through the undergrowth with the fluid efficiency of a species that had evolved in precisely this environment, every step placed without apparent calculation, her body reading the forest floor the way Tal read soil composition, through accumulated knowledge that had become instinct. The bioluminescent fungi beneath her boots bloomed blue as she passed and faded the moment she cleared them. When Tal stepped on them, they made a sound like wet paper. Keep your voice down, Vess said, without turning. The forest processes sound as information. Unnecessary noise is interpreted as aggression. What's necessary noise? Breathing, movement, the sounds of something alive and not hunting. Tal adjusted the strap of his canvas bag. Inside, 1 crystal flask, sealed with a wax cap etched with Valdrin preservation runes. 1 small vial of Drav's blood, the Emperor had provided it without explanation, and with the expression of a man paying a debt he did not enjoy acknowledging. A protein bar he had found in his jacket pocket, which he suspected was from the previous year and which he was keeping as emergency morale. He had said goodbye to Lyra before the Whisperwood's edge. She had been awake, which had not surprised him. She had always been awake when he needed her not to be, the same way Anna had always known which thoughts he was hiding. Lyra had looked at him with her clear, unimpressed eyes and said, "You're going into the dark forest." "Yes. To get the magic water." "That's approximately correct. And then you're coming back." It had not been a question. He had held the certainty in her voice and understood that it was not naive certainty. She was Anna's daughter, and she knew the difference between a promise and a statement of preference. She was telling him what was required. He had said yes and meant it, and was now in the Whisperwood 3 hours from the keep trying to keep meaning it. Drav had told him what the Moonwell required. A question asked honestly. A drop of royal blood to open the channel. The well was sentient, not in the way of a mind, but in the way of an accumulation, a place where the planet's oldest memory pooled and developed preference. It responded to those who did not seek power. It responded to joy, to the frequency of genuine connection, to the specific emotional register that the Valdrin, for all their ancient wisdom, had not been able to reliably produce for a century. She found it, Drav had said, and the way he had said it, the quality of the past tense, the particular weight on the pronoun, had told Tal more than the words. Anna had been here. Tal had not been able to ask more. His voice had gone somewhere inaccessible, and the hour had been wrong, and Drav had said the well will tell you what you need to know in a way that closed the topic, with the finality of a man who intended to open it again on his own terms at a time he controlled. He was going to think about that later. Currently, he was thinking about the forest. They had been walking for 3 hours when Vess stopped. She stopped without announcement, one hand coming up in the signal Tal had learned meant halt and do not speak, her ears swiveling forward with the focused precision of instruments calibrating to a signal. Tal stopped. He breathed. He listened. The wind had gone. Not diminished. Gone, the way sound went in a room when the last voice stopped. Absolute, total, a silence that felt deliberate rather than natural. The fungi on the ground around them had shifted from blue to the bruised purple he had not seen before and did not have a reference for. "Vess," he said quietly. "Do not run," she said. Her voice had not changed in register but had changed in quality, the difference between professional calm and the performance of professional calm over something that was not calm at all. "Do not make sudden movements. Whatever you see, stay beside me." "What am I going to see?" The shadows detached from the trees. Tal had read the colony briefings on grief wraiths. He had read them the way he had read the moon fever briefings, thoroughly, with the slightly detached attention of a man who expected the information to remain theoretical. The briefings had described them as spirit manifestations of unresolved loss, drawn to grief-frequency emotional states, capable of inducing sustained hallucinatory recall of personal trauma. The briefings had not described what it felt like to have the temperature of the air drop 20 degrees in 1 second, while shapes that were not shadows, but were made of what shadows would be if shadows had hunger moved out of the trees toward you. There were 7, loosely lupin the way suggestions were lupin, not wolves exactly, but the concept of wolves distilled to silhouette, their outlines shifting, smoking at the edges. Where eyes should have been, nothing, not darkness, absence, the specific absence of something that had once been there. "How many?" Tal said. 7 visible. Vess had her short sword out. The blade caught no light because there was no light to catch. There may be more in the deep canopy. "They feed on loss, yes. They will show you," she stopped, because the nearest wraith had moved, not toward them but through the clearing. And as it passed through the space between them, the temperature dropped again, and Tal felt something arrive in his chest that was not his own feeling but was absolutely real. A wave of grief so specific, and so sourced that he recognized it before he understood it, the way you recognized a voice before you identified the words. The clearing dissolved. He was on a ridge. He knew the ridge. He had stood on it once in the rain while a recovery team moved below him through the wreckage of a transport skiff. The air smelled of burning metal. The rain was the specific rain of Valdris's southern lowlands, heavy and cold, carrying the mineral taste of the rock formations. He had not been on this ridge for 2 years. He had refused to go back. The colony had offered a memorial service at the site, and he had attended by not attending, which had been understood by everyone who knew him and forgiven by most. "Anna," he said. She was there, below the ridge at the edge of the wreckage, caught under a beam in the way the recovery report had described, but not in the way he had allowed himself to picture, because picturing had been inadvisable for 2 years. Her white coat was visible even through the rain, the specific white that had survived every field posting and every practical argument against white as a working color, because Anna had decided it was the right color for a doctor and the rest of the universe could adjust. "Why didn't you come?" the thing wearing her face said. Its voice was wrong, her words, but not her voice, something that had studied her voice and reproduced it with the accuracy of a recording and none of the warmth of a person. "Where were you? You were always somewhere else." He knew it was the Wraith. He knew this with the clinical clarity that had survived the grief wave. The part of him that had sat on nursery floors and held the line with a children's game knew exactly what was happening and could name it without being protected by the nomming. But knowing what it was did not make the ridge less real. The rain was real. The smell of burning metal was real. The white coat was real. "You weren't fast enough," the thing said. "You were never fast enough. She needed a different kind of husband. Someone who ran toward things instead of." "Tell." Vess's voice from very far away, or very close, he could not locate it. The Wraith pushed deeper. It showed him the recovery report, the timeline, the 12 minutes between the transport's distress signal and the arrival of the first responders, the 12 minutes during which he had been in the colony's eastern greenhouse repotting a batch of starroot, because it was a Tuesday and Tuesday was repotting day. And he had not checked the emergency channel because he never checked the emergency channel on repotting Tuesdays. 12 minutes. "You failed her," the Wraith said, and the specific horror of it was that it was using her voice to say it, the voice that had said, "I love you," and "eat something," and "Tal. The tomatoes are fine," and now it was using that voice to say the thing he had been saying to himself for 2 years in the dark behind his hands. He fell to his knees. The ridge was cold and real and wet, and he was on it, and she was below it, and 12 minutes was 12 minutes regardless of how many times he had run the arithmetic. "Tal." Vess again, closer, urgent. "Tal, I need you to." He heard a second sound behind Vess's voice. Not from the forest. From further, much further from the direction of the keep, from the east tower where he had left his daughter asleep in a bed of Valdrin furs with her yellow scarf and her clear eyes and her voice that said, "You're coming back," like a statement of requirements. "You have to come back and play." Not Lyra's voice. His memory of Lyra's voice, which was different from the Wraith's reproduction of Anna because it was his, because it came from inside rather than being injected, because it was warm in the specific way that genuine things were warm even when everything around them was cold. "If you don't come back, who checks under my bed for monsters?" He was on his knees on a ridge in a whisperwood on a planet he had not chosen, and his wife was dead, and had been dead for 2 years, and 12 minutes was 12 minutes, and Lyra needed someone to check under the bed. He raised his hands. The movement cost more than any movement he had made in his life. His arms had the weight of wet stone. His hands were shaking with the specific tremor of someone operating against a force that did not want to be opposed. He raised them anyway, because raised was better than not raised, and because the alternative was staying on the ridge, and the ridge was not where he lived. He covered his face. The darkness behind his palms was his. "I am gone," he said, to the ridge, to the Wraith, to the 12 minutes. "I am gone." He felt the Wraith's confusion arrive as a physical sensation, a loosening, a disruption in the pressure of the grief wave, the way a current shifts when something interrupts its source. The visual had been cut. The Wraith had been feeding on the visual, and the visual was gone, and in its place was just a man with his hands over his face in the dark. He thought of Lyra. He thought of the twins, the way Kaya had grabbed his thumb on the first night, and held it with the absolute conviction of a creature that had made a decision about this particular thumb and was not revising it. He thought of Commander Biscuit maintaining his post in the corner of the ironwood crib. He thought of the music box, slightly damaged, playing its out-of-tune version of a song he had made up in the first winter when the moons were wrong and the nights were too long. He thought of Anna saying, "You fix things after I break them open. We were always a team." She had said that. He had forgotten she had said that. Peekaboo. He threw his hands wide. The ridge was gone. He was in the whisperwood on the cold ground, his palms pressed into the soil. Above him, 3 moons. Around him, the shadow wolves circling, but circling at a distance now, the nearest one 5 feet back, its formless outline disrupted, smoking at the edges with the instability of something that had lost its grip. He scrambled to his feet. Vess was on the ground. She had the sword in her hand, but it was doing nothing useful. The wraiths were not physical, and the sword was a physical response to a non-physical problem, which Tal would have said was a medical error if he'd had the breath for it. A large wraith loomed over her, its absent eyes directed at her face, and Vess's eyes were open but not seeing the forest. She was seeing something else. Her hands were shaking, and she was making a sound that was not words, a low, torn sound, the sound of someone watching something they could not stop. He moved. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides and grabbed her shoulders. Vess, he shook her. Vess, look at me. She didn't see him. Her eyes were fixed on something that was not in the forest. He let go of her shoulders. He placed both hands over her eyes. Hey, he said directly into her ear, his voice raw from the nursery and the storm and the ridge. You are hiding. You are in the dark behind my hands, and the monsters cannot see you when you are in the dark. You are not in the nursery. You are not watching them die. You are here. You are in the forest with me. The wraith above her screamed, not a sound of aggression, a sound of disruption, the frequency of something that had been feeding and had the feed cut. When I move my hands, Tal said, you do not look at the dark. You look at me, you look at Tal, the gardener, the man who cannot fix his own music box. Are you ready? He felt her body change under his hands. A shudder, long and deep, the shudder of something releasing. He pulled his hands away. Peekaboo. Vess blinked. She saw him, her eyes focused, the clinical gold of them sharpened from wherever they had been, the practiced assessment returning in stages, her mind coming back to its professional footing the way a trained reflex returned after shock. She saw his face, his ridiculous, tired, entirely human face. Tal, she said. That's right. The wraith above her wavered. It was looking at them, both of them now, the joined anchor of 2 people who were here and present and connected, and finding that the grief it had been eating had been interrupted at the source and was not resuming. It had no instruction for this. Its form destabilized, the silhouette losing coherence, the edges dissolving into the same mist that the fog became when the moons burned it off. I see you, Tal said to the wraith. He said it quietly, not with aggression, not with the force he had used to hold the line in the nursery, with the specific quality of someone who understood loss well enough to recognize it in another form. The wraith had been a person once, or it had been made of what persons left behind when they went. He did not know the theology. He knew the feeling. You are lost, he said, but I am found. You can go sleep. He covered his face one more time, held the darkness, held the warmth of it, the specific temperature of his own presence. He opened his hands. Peekaboo. The wraith came apart like smoke in wind. It dispersed upward into the silver canopy and was absorbed by the trees and was not there anymore. The others, all 6 of the remaining shapes, followed, one by one, the mist rising into the Whisperwood's upper reaches until the clearing was just a clearing again, cold and still and ordinary. The fungi on the ground shifted back from purple to blue. Tal sat down heavily next to Vess, his legs making the decision before his mind authorized it. They sat on the forest floor in the aftermath of the temperature returning to normal and the sounds of the ordinary forest reasserting themselves, the distant movement of something in the high canopy, the thin sound of wind finding its way back through the trees. You banished them, Vess said. Her voice had been taken apart and was reassembling itself in real time, with a nursery rhyme. Psychological architecture, Tal said. They attack the belief that what's gone is gone permanently. The game is a direct counter. Hide, reveal, it's a physical argument that things which disappear come back. He looked at his hands. They can't eat you if you're arguing back. Vess was quiet. She looked at her sword, which she sheathed with the careful motion of someone putting away a tool that had been found insufficient and was being filed under limitations. She looked at her hands. What did they show you? Tal said. She did not answer immediately. The twins. In the cribs, cold, a pause, 50 years of practice, and I could not keep 2 children alive through one fever cycle. She looked at the trees. That is what they showed me, not the past. The future I cannot stop. He looked at her. In the blue light of the recovering fungi, she looked less like a statue of a healer and more like a healer, the same way Drav had looked less like an emperor and more like a father. The keep had a way of doing that, he was finding, of stripping the institution down to the person inside it when the pressure was sufficient. You kept them alive for 7 days, Tal said. You kept them alive through a moonstorm that the ancient protocols had no answer for. The only reason I have a game to play is because you had the medicine to deliver. He held her gaze. We are not separate operations, Vess. We are the same operation. She looked at him for a long moment. You are strange, she said, not in the way I originally meant. How did you originally mean it? As an insult, the corner of her mouth moved. I no longer mean it as an insult. He almost laughed. His throat would not support it, but the shape of the laugh was there. We should move, he said. The well is ahead. Yes, she stood, smoothing her robes with the automatic gesture of someone restoring their professional surface. She offered him a hand. He took it. Her grip was strong, and she pulled him to his feet without apparent effort. She did not immediately let go. It lasted 1 second, maybe 2. Long enough to be deliberate and brief enough to be deniable. Then she released his hand and turned toward the dense thicket ahead and began walking, and Tal followed, adjusting the strap of his canvas bag with its crystal flask and its vial of royal blood and its year-old protein bar. The moonwell was a circle of white stones around a pool that reflected nothing. That was the first thing, the reflection. Above them, the 3 moons were present and enormous, their light falling on everything in the clearing with the impartial generosity of celestial bodies that did not discriminate between the deserving and the undeserving. But the pool's surface was dark. Not dark with depth, dark with intention, a mirror turned away from the sky, showing only the faces of those who stood above it. Tal crouched at the edge. He looked at himself. He looked older than he felt, which was something he had been avoiding confirming by staying away from still water and mirrors. His hair had the look of hair that had not been a priority. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that had not been there when they arrived on Valdris. The water rippled. Nothing had touched it. A sound arrived that was not from outside his skull. It was inside it, in the bone, in the specific frequency of the planet, speaking directly to whatever in the organism could receive it. Who returns? Tal Hart, he said, feeling the absurdity and setting it aside. I need help for the twins, Drav's children. They are going to die without the well water. The blood is not yours. The cubs are not yours. Why do you stand where their emperor cannot? He thought about the answer. He could have said because the emperor sent me or because I had no choice, and both would have been partially true and entirely insufficient. Because they're just kids, he said. And I know what it is to be a kid in a world that's too big and too loud and too much, and someone needs to be the person who sits on the floor and covers their face until the scary thing gets confused enough to pause. He paused. I'm not doing this for the Empire. I'm doing this because they are 3 years old and they have a father who is terrified, and I know what that looks like from both sides. The pool was silent. She made a pact, the well said. And the water rose. It was not the crash site. He had expected the crash site. He had experienced the crash site already, from the ridge, in the Wraith's version, and had come through it. And he had believed that having come through it once, he was now in possession of whatever the universe intended him to take from it. The well showed him something else. He was above the scene, not on the ridge but further, looking down at the full geometry of the crash. He saw the transport skiff, the fire, the rain. He saw the recovery beacon blinking green 50 yards from the wreckage, the clear path, the available exit. He saw Anna. She was not where the Wraith had put her. She was upright, moving through the wreckage with the methodical efficiency he recognized from every crisis he had ever watched her manage. She was looking for someone. She found the someone, a Valdrin woman, pregnant, her silver fur scorched, her leg pinned under a collapsed beam. She assessed the situation with the speed of a person whose entire career had been built on rapid assessment. He saw her look at the beacon. He saw her look at the woman. He saw her look at the sky, at the angle of the fuel tank, at the structural damage, at the specific configuration of the wreckage that told her, in the language of physics that she spoke fluently, exactly how long she had and exactly what the options were. She took her medical shield, a personal unit designed for one person, a small device that generated a protective field around a single body, and she placed it over the Valdrin woman. She placed it over the unborn twins. Anna, he said, his voice came out like a torn thing. She looked up. She looked directly at the place where he was watching from. The place above and outside the scene, the place she should not have been able to see. She looked directly at him with the expression she gave Lyra when Lyra was worried about something, and Anna wanted her to understand that being worried was appropriate, but being afraid was optional. She smiled. Not a sad smile, not the smile of someone accepting defeat. The smile of someone who had worked out the problem and found the solution and was at peace with the cost of it. The same smile she had given him 1,000 times across a kitchen table when he was struggling with something she had already solved. The smile that said, "I know what I'm doing. I know what this costs. I'm doing it anyway." "She came to us before the end," the well said. "She spoke to the water. She made the pact," she said. The water shifted. It was not the well's voice anymore. It was hers. "If he comes," Anna's voice said, "from the water, from the planet, from the place where the planet stored the things it intended to keep, tell him I didn't leave. I went to hide so they could be found. Tell him to finish the game." The scene dissolved. Tal was at the edge of the pool with tears on his face and both hands pressed against the white stones at the water's edge. He had not felt himself crying. He became aware of it the way you became aware of rain when you had been outside for long enough to stop noticing the weather. She had known. She had known in the last minutes of her life that the twins would need someone, and she had known, with the specific certainty that she brought to all her assessments, who that someone would be. She had not left him on Valdris by accident. She had not left him by oversight or fate or the blind indifference of an uncaring universe. She had, in the last intelligent act of a life that had been full of intelligent acts, set up the next move. "You absolute," Tal started. He stopped. He started again, and this time his voice held something that was not grief, and was not anger, and was not the 12 minutes feeling. It was something that had no name except the feeling you had when someone you loved did something so entirely, recognizably themselves, that even in the wreckage of it you could not pretend to be surprised. "You stubborn," he said, "brilliant woman." He reached into his bag. He found the vial of Drav's blood and held it over the pool. The water waited. "I understand," he said. "Absence is not the end. It is the pause in the game. She went away so they could stay. Now I have to make sure they stay." He poured the drop of royal blood into the pool. Behind him, Vess stepped forward and began to chant. Her voice was clear and steady and entirely unperformed. The voice of a healer doing the work she had trained 50 years to do, and in this moment that training and this work had found each other, and she knew it. Tal put his hands into the pool. He did not think about technique or protocol or the correct method of petitioning a sentient planetary spring for curative water. He thought about the peekaboo. He thought about the specific moment in the game when the hands come down, the suspension, the pause, the nothing between gone and here, and the moment after it, when everything that had been absent was present again, and the child's face opened with the relief of confirmed continuation. He thought, "You are safe. The pause is just a pause. You always come back." The well erupted with gold. Not the cold silver of the moons, not the red of the moonstorm. Gold, warm gold, the color of a kitchen in the morning, and a music box playing 3 slightly out-of-tune bars, and a yellow scarf that still smelled like Anna if you pressed it to your face on the right kind of day. The water spiraled into the crystal flask, filling it entirely, warm in his hands, alive in the specific way that things were alive when they had been made with intention. The voice of the well faded. "Take it, the cycle is closed." Tal held the flask. He slumped back onto the white stones of the glade. Vess sat down next to him, her chanting finished, her robes rumpled in a way she had apparently stopped caring about. They sat in the quiet of the glade and let the quiet have a moment. "She saved them," Vess said finally. "Dr. Anna Hart, she shielded the Empress." "Yes. We were told she died in the cave-in." Vess's voice was careful, that it was structural. That was the story Drav chose to tell. Tal looked at the flask in his hands. "He told me there is more, about Anna, about why the well waited for me specifically." He paused. He said he would tell me when we return. Vess was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you want to know?" He thought about it. He thought about the ridge and the 12 minutes and the smile from the vision and the voice from the water. He thought about what knowing had already cost and what not knowing had cost before that. "Yes," he said, "I think I have to." A sound tore through the glade from the direction of the keep, not the grinding of the storm, not the whisperwood's ambient language. A howl. Physical, immediate, the sound of an adult Valdrin in extremis, and beneath it, woven into it, the smaller sounds of children in crisis. Vess was on her feet before the echo finished. The medicine has worn through completely. Tal was already standing, the flask secured in his bag, the bag on his shoulder, his legs moving toward the path before the decision had fully formed. 3 miles, Vess said. I know. Uphill. I know. He ran. The whisperwood moved around him, the fungi blooming and fatting under his boots, the canopy shifting above, the silver trees reading his passage as something that was alive and not hunting and very much in a hurry. Behind him, Vess matched his pace without effort, her hand on the sword hilt out of habit, her eyes already calculating what they would find when they arrived. Above them, the 3 moons began their turn toward alignment. The keep was alight against the mountain. Tal ran toward it. The keep's courtyard was chaos in the specific way of a place that had been orderly for too long and had forgotten how to manage the alternative. Guards ran in directions that suggested urgent purpose without suggesting coordination. The air smelled of ozone and scorched stone, and the sharp biological note that Tal had learned over 7 days to associate with the Valdrin stress response, something between adrenaline and static, something that bypassed the nose and arrived directly in the back of the skull as information. Torches in the courtyard brackets guttered in a wind that was not quite wind, something moving through the air that had source and direction but no meteorological explanation. Out of the way, Vess said, in the voice she used when she was not asking. The guards parted. They took the spiral stairs at a pace that was not sustainable for a human body over distance, but that the next 3 minutes required regardless of what the body thought about it. Tal's lungs were conducting a formal objection by the second landing. He noted the objection and continued. The flask was warm against his side through the canvas of the bag, a steady warmth that had not faded since the glade, that seemed less like the retained temperature of liquid, and more like something the liquid was producing actively, the way a living thing produced warmth. He heard the nursery before he saw it. The sound was not the dual-tone harmonic shriek of the moonstorm night. That had been a sound of things being pulled. This was a sound of things nearly gone, lower, less structured, the specific frequency of systems running out of reserve. He had heard it once before, in the colony's Eastern Medical Unit when a patient had been brought in past the threshold of intervention, and he had not forgotten the quality of it and did not want to be hearing it now. The doors were off their hinges. Not damaged, removed, the ironwood lying in the corridor at angles that suggested a force that had not been trying to destroy the door so much as an occupant of the room who had stopped noticing the door was there. Tal stepped over the threshold and took in the room in the single fast assessment that 7 days of crisis had trained into him. The cribs were overturned. Drav was on his knees in the center of the room, half-shifted, not the clean transformation of an adult Valdrin in full control, but the jagged, grinding process of a body fighting its own instinct, an emperor trying to contain an alpha response that the room's crisis frequency was triggering past the point of his ability to suppress. His size in this state was staggering. He was trying to make himself a barrier with his body, trying to use his mass as a shield between his children and whatever the room had become, but his own presence was the problem. The alpha frequency radiating from him in his stress state was feeding the very crisis he was trying to contain. The twins were in the far corner. They were climbing the wall. Not metaphorically. Their claws were in the stone, and they were moving upward with the automatic, instinct-driven efficiency of cubs whose bodies had made a decision. Their minds were no longer present to authorize. They were fully wolf now in ways they had not been even at the moonstorm's worst. The partial transformation resolved into something more complete. The patches of fur continuous. The faces restructured, only the eyes maintaining any trace of the children he had spent 7 days sitting on cold floors for, and even those eyes were going, the brown disappearing behind the fever's gold. From under a heavy oak table, a pair of eyes found him. Lyra. She was not crying. She had her yellow scarf pulled up to her chin and her knees drawn to her chest, and she was watching him with the clear, unafraid assessment she had brought to every difficult thing since she was 4, and had decided that being frightened of things was less useful than being attentive to them. Duh, she said. Stay there, he said. She stayed. Drav turned. His face in its half-shifted state was not a face that communicated in the registers Tal had learned to read, but the eyes were still the Emperor's eyes, and what was in them was the same thing that had been in them on the first night when Tal had sat on the floor of the nursery and covered his face. Not command, not authority. The thing beneath both of those, the thing that drove command and authority in the first place. Do it now, Drav said, His voice was distorted by the shift, the consonants wrong in the way of a mouth that had changed shape mid-sentence. Now Tal Hart. Tal moved to the center of the room. He passed Drav's kneeling form and felt the alpha frequency like walking through a field, not hostile, just enormous, the ambient pressure of a power too large for the space it was in. He kept moving. He set the canvas bag down. He unlatched it. He looked at the crystal flask and looked at Vess, who had come in behind him and was already at the wreckage of her apothecary table, her hands moving through the debris with the efficiency of someone who had done field triage and knew which equipment was salvageable and which was not. Silver first, he said, then the moonwater. Drav told me they work separately, but the well showed me they need to work together. The silver anchors the body, the water anchors. The soul, Vess said. She had found the silver bowl intact under a fallen shelf and was already checking it for contamination. Yes, I understand the mechanism. She looked up. The combination, the temperature, the resonance frequency. Will change. He held up the flask. It will become something neither of them is alone. That's the point. She held his gaze for 1 second. Then she poured the silver into the bowl and uncorked the flask he handed her. The combination was immediate and physical, and nothing like either component had been separately. The silver's cold metallic color dissolved as the moonwater touched it, the two liquids finding each other the way rivers found each other at confluences, not mixing so much as becoming, the gray and the gold producing a third thing that was white, pearlescent, luminous with an internal light that had no electrical source. The temperature of the bowl rose to match living skin. The smell changed from metal and mineral to something that had no name in any language Tal spoke, something that smelled like continuance. It is rewriting the base frequency, Vess said softly, watching the bowl. Good, Tal said, that's what we need. He looked at the wall where the twins were still climbing. He looked at Drav, still on his knees, still fighting his own instinct. He looked at Lyra under the table. Drav, he said, move to the balcony. Your frequency is feeding the crisis. I need you out of the direct space. For one moment, the Emperor looked at him with the full weight of 2 centuries of authority, confronting an instruction from a human gardener. Then he moved to the balcony. He moved with the careful, compressed deliberateness of a very large thing making itself temporarily smaller, and the moment he crossed the threshold, the room's ambient pressure dropped by a measurable degree, the air redistributing itself into something a human respiratory system could operate in without cost. Tal sat down. Cold stone floor, as always. His floor. The floor he had claimed by repetition, the floor that knew the particular weight of him now, the specific placement of his hands and the angle of his back against the nearest crib leg. He sat down with the bowl of combined medicine within reach, and he looked at the wall where 2 children who were nearly not children anymore were trying to find a way out of themselves. Hey, he said. The twins did not turn. Hey, louder without aggression, the volume of someone who needed to be heard rather than someone who needed to dominate. I know you're in there. I've met you. Kaya, you grabbed my thumb on the first night, and you have been very opinionated about the yellow quilt. Rowan, you gave Commander Biscuit to me once when you thought I looked sad, which was the nicest thing anyone has done for me in 2 years. The climbing slowed. Not stopped. Slowed, a fraction of hesitation threading through the automatic instinct, something in the sound of their names reaching whatever was left of the children inside the fever. It hurts, Tal said. I know it hurts. The world is too big and too loud and everything is pulling in directions you don't have words for yet. That is real. I'm not telling you it isn't real. He dipped his fingers in the combined medicine and felt the warmth of it travel up through his hand like something returning from a distance. But you know what else is real? The game. The game is real. The game says things that go away come back. The game says the dark behind the hands is just the pause before the return. The game does not lie. He raised his hands. He covered his face. The room went quiet in the way that rooms went quiet when something shifted in the thing generating the noise. Not silence from outside, but stilled from within, the source of the sound reconsidering. Where is Tal? He said. From under the oak table, a small voice said, Where is Tal? Lyra, joining the game without being asked, understanding without being told, the daughter of a woman who saw what was needed and the daughter of a man who stayed and covered his face in the dark, putting both of those inheritances to use. Tal held the pause. He held it longer than usual, not from performance but from necessity, from the understanding that the pause this time was doing more work than the reveal, that the suspension itself was the medicine, the moment between gone and here where fear held its breath waiting to learn what came next. He dropped his hands. Peekaboo. Rowan fell off the wall. Not in the way of a creature losing its grip, in the way of a creature whose grip had been interrupted mid-decision. The claws releasing before the mind authorized the release, the body responding to a signal older than the fever and older than the instinct and older than the feral thing that had been driving it upward. He landed on all fours and sat. He was breathing hard, and his eyes were still mostly gold, and the fur along his spine was still at full extension. But he was on the floor, which was not the wall, and he was looking at Tal, which was not looking for an exit. Kaya came down more slowly. She descended the last 3 feet and sat beside her brother with the careful, deliberate movement of a child who had made a decision and was executing it with the dignity the decision required. They looked at Tal. He dipped his fingers in the bowl. The combined medicine was warm on his skin, not painful, not invasive, present, the way a hand on a shoulder was present, the way a voice in the dark was present. He raised his dripping hand. He covered his face. Lyra from under the table, where is Tal? He dropped his hands. Peekaboo, he touched his wet fingertips to Rowan's forehead. The boy flinched. Then the medicine absorbed, not into the skin exactly, through it, the warmth traveling downward with the purposeful direction of something that knew where it was going, following the fever's architecture to its source and beginning the work of conversation rather than combat. Because that was what the combined medicine did, Tal understood now. It didn't fight the wolf spirit. It sat down with it. It said, "You are real, and you are welcome here, and you do not have to destroy the person you live in to be real and welcome." The fever's color changed on Rowan's forehead. The red faded. In its place, spreading outward from Tal's fingerprint in the slow, deliberate geometry of something settling rather than something being suppressed, a pattern emerged. Silver, complex, the lines of it moving with the particular logic of something that had been encoded rather than designed. Not a scar, not a mark of damage. A mark of integration, the wolf spirit made visible on the child's skin, given form and place and permanence, no longer a force fighting for dominance, but a presence that had been acknowledged and had therefore stopped needing to fight. "It is not curing the fever," Vess said, from very close behind him. Her voice was the voice of a scientist watching a result that was revising the question. "It is." Teaching it, Tal said, "Yes." He turned to Kaya. He covered his face. Lyra from under the table with slightly more confidence. "Where is Tal?" Peekaboo, he touched his fingers to Kaya's chest above her heart. The same process, the same absorption, the same silver pattern flowering outward from contact, different from Rowan's, her own, specific to her, the wolf spirit taking the form that was hers rather than a generic design. She let out a breath that had been held for what sounded like hours, her ribs expanding for the first time without the cage of the fever constricting the movement. He fell into the rhythm. Dip, cover, where is Tal? Reveal, touch, dip, cover, Lyra's voice joining his, the small, certain voice from under the table making the game larger than one person, making it a call and response rather than a solo, a conversation rather than a monologue. The twins' eyes cooling degree by degree from the fever's gold toward the ordinary amber of their resting state, the silver patterns spreading. The room's atmosphere changing the way the atmosphere changed after a storm had finished. Not quiet exactly, but clear, the charge that had been building dissipating into something that could be breathed. He did not notice when it became too much. He noticed afterward, in the way you noticed a threshold you had crossed only when you found yourself on the other side of it without having felt the crossing. He was in the rhythm, dip, cover, reveal, touch. And the rhythm was working, the twins were here, were present, were coming back from wherever the fever had been taking them, and he was bringing them back. And the bringing back required something from him that he was giving, and he was giving it. And he did not notice the giving becoming more than he had to give because the rhythm was the rhythm, and the rhythm did not stop. The darkness behind his hands stopped being his. That was the first signal the temperature changed. The darkness that was supposed to be warm with his own presence going cool at the edges. The specific warmth of here, I am present thinning like air at altitude, still there but less of it, and less and less. The darkness began to look like something. It looked like the glade, like the white stones and the pool that reflected faces. But the pool was larger now, and he was closer to the edge than he had been, and the edge had a quality of invitation that had not been present before, a gentleness that was not threatening, that was simply available, like an open door, like a comfortable chair after a long day, like setting down a thing you had been carrying so long you had forgotten the carrying was optional. Come, a voice said, not the well's voice, not the wraith's voice, something that knew him better than either of those, that used his own internal frequency rather than an imitation of it. You have done enough. The work is finished. You can come and rest. He felt himself moving. Not physically, not his body, which was kneeling on the nursery floor with his hands over his face. Something else moving, the part of him that the game drew on, the part that was not technique or performance but genuine presence, the thing that the wraiths could not eat and the fever could not resist. That part was moving toward the edge of the pool. It is peaceful, the voice said. You know it is. You have felt it before in the work. The moment after the pause, the moment when the game says things come back, you know that moment is real. You know because you made it real for others. Now it can be real for you. He thought this is the price. He thought not the moonwater, not the forest, this. He thought you give the game to enough frightened children and the game eventually claims you back. Fair. He thought Lyra. The thought arrived small and then immediately enormous, the way a word arrives small in a silent room and then fills it. Not Lyra's name as an argument, just Lyra's name as a fact, a specific and irreducible fact, the most specific and irreducible fact in his possession. She was under the oak table with her yellow scarf and her clear eyes, and she had said you're coming back, and she had joined the game without being asked, because she was 7 years old, and the daughter of 2 people who ran toward things, and she had said where is Tal in her small, certain voice, and she was still saying it. He could hear it. He could hear her saying it from under the table, the repetition of it, the voice that had started as confident joining and was now something with an edge to it, a frequency of urgency, a child's voice discovering that the game was lasting too long. Where is Tal, she said. And then, duh. And then different, not the game's line, not the call-end response, but the raw version underneath it. Duh, open your eyes. You have to do the peekaboo. You promised to come back. He felt her hands on his wrists. Small hands, the specific smallness of a 7-year-old's hands. The grip of someone who did not have the physical strength to force anything, and was therefore using every other resource available, which included the grip itself, and the voice, and the refusal to release, and whatever she had inherited from a woman who had stood between a beam and a burning fuel tank and smiled at the sky. You promised. The pool edge receded. Not easily. The warmth of it pulled back the way all comfortable things pulled back when you decided against them, with a kind of gentle reproach, the feeling of a path not taken. He acknowledged the feeling. He did not go back toward it. He was a gardener. He knew the difference between a plant going dormant and a plant dying, and he knew that choosing dormancy over death was not defeat, was in fact the most sophisticated thing an organism could do in conditions that were not right for full growth. He chose dormancy. He chose Lyra. He ripped his hands away from his face. Peekaboo, he said, and the word came out wrecked, scraped from the bottom of what he had. But it came out, and he lunged forward with the last of the combined medicine on his fingers and pressed both palms against the twins' faces simultaneously. One on each cheek, both at once. The contact completing the circuit the rhythm had been building toward, the final touch that the medicine needed to finish the work the well had designed it to do. The nursery exploded with light. Gold, warm, the same gold as the glade. It filled the room from the center outward, traveled the crystal veins in the walls and made them luminous, reached the glass dome above and scattered into the moonlight and was absorbed by it and became part of it. The twins shuddered in unison and collapsed. Not away toward Tal. He caught them. Both of them, their combined weight more than he had managed before, his arms finding them by reflex before his mind had processed the catching. He held them against his chest and felt their heartbeats, separate and present and steady, the rhythms of sleeping children who had been somewhere terrible and had come back and were now entirely, completely asleep. He sat on the floor. He sat on the floor with the Wolf Emperor's children in his arms and looked at the ceiling and breathed. Lyra came out from under the table. She did not run. She walked, with the deliberate, unhurried pace of someone who had decided that running would acknowledge a fear she was no longer willing to carry. She walked to her father and put her arms around his neck from behind and pressed her face between his shoulder blades and held on. He could feel her heart. It was going very fast. All of her careful steadiness was true and also coexisting with a heart going very fast. "You took too long," she said. "I know," he said. "I got stuck." "Don't get stuck. I'll do my best." She held on for another moment. Then she straightened up and looked at the twins with the assessing expression she brought to new situations. "Their faces have stars in them," she said. He looked. The silver patterns were there, faint now, the luminosity reduced to a subtle shimmer under the skin, the kind of mark that would be visible in certain lights and invisible in others. Not covering their faces. Threaded through them, the way veins were threaded through leaves, structural rather than decorative. "Yes," he said, "they do." A shadow fell over the three of them. Drav had come in from the balcony. He had shifted back completely, the Emperor again, or the closest approximation of the Emperor available to a father who had just watched his children almost die. His armor was scorched. His hair was the chaos of a man who had been fighting the storm's exterior manifestations, while Tal fought its interior ones. He looked at the twins in Tal's arms with the specific look of a man conducting an inventory of things he had been afraid he would no longer have. He dropped to his knees. The sound of it hit the stone with the weight of someone for whom kneeling was not a casual gesture, and he reached out, both hands. The hands that had spent the night fighting and before that spent weeks containing themselves near the fragile bodies of his children. And he touched Rowan's hair and Kaya's cheek with a gentleness that had no performance in it. They were sleeping, simply sleeping, their faces smooth, their patterns shifting faintly in the keep's crystal light. Drav made a sound. Tal had heard the Emperor command and pronounce and contain, and on one occasion bark with the authority of someone who had been obeyed by armies. He had not heard anything like this sound. It was not dramatic. It was not operatic. It was very small and very private, the sound a relief makes when it is so enormous it has no theatrical equivalent, when it simply escapes before the person containing it can find a form for it. Then Drav put his arms around all of them. Around the twins and around Lyra and around Tal, the enormous arms wrapping them all in the kind of embrace that did not leave much room for anything except being held. The embrace of a person who had spent the last hours holding everything back and had now decisively stopped. Tal's ribs made a sound. "Can't breathe." "You gave them back," Drav said, into Tal's shoulder, not the Emperor's voice. The father's voice, unguarded, speaking from somewhere the throne had never been allowed to reach. "You brought them back from the dark." "My ribs," Tal said. The Emperor released them. He sat back on his heels, his eyes wet, blazing with the particular intensity of a man who had not cried in public since becoming Emperor and was not certain whether that had just changed. He looked at Tal. He turned to the doorway, where guards had gathered at the edges of visibility, not entering, maintaining the perimeter of this moment with the instinctive courtesy of warriors who recognized when they were witnessing something that did not require their participation. "Hear me," Drav said. His voice, restored to its full register, carried to the doorway and beyond it, down the corridor and through the keep's crystal nervous system into whatever ears were present. "From this night forward, let no wolf in this keep speak of play as trivial. Let no one call gentleness weakness. Let no one look at a small thing and see only smallness." He looked at Tal. "This human, this father, has faced the worst this world can produce. He has faced it with a children's game and a song about a vehicle. He has not flinched and he has not retreated and he has not once claimed to be more than he is. A pause. He is more than he knows. He is the bravest person I have stood beside in 2 centuries of standing beside people." Tal felt his face doing something embarrassing. "That's you're significantly overstating." "You will accept the compliment," Drav said, with the tone of a man who issued imperial decrees and found the current decree not substantially different. Tal accepted the compliment. Lyra patted his arm. "He's right, you know." "I know you think so. Everyone thinks so." She looked at the guards in the doorway, at Vess standing against the wall with her robes rumpled and her expression somewhere past the end of her existing vocabulary. "Even the doctor lady, and she didn't like you at first." Vess said with precision, "I found him professionally unqualified." "And now?" Lyra asked. Vess looked at Tal for a moment, at the twins sleeping in his arms, at the nursery that had been a waiting room for something bad and was now the place where something good had finished happening. Now Vess said, I find the category insufficient. Tal looked at the twins. He looked at Lyra. He looked at the silver patterns in the children's skin, the permanent record of a night that had required everything from everyone in the room. He looked at the flask in the canvas bag, empty now, and thought of the pool and the glade and Anna's voice from the water and the smile she had given the sky before the beam came down. You said, Tal said to Drav, that there was more, about Anna, about why the well waited for me specifically. The room's quality changed. Drav rose from his knees. He rose slowly, with the deliberateness of a man preparing to say something that had been waiting a long time to be said. He looked at the guards in the doorway. Clear the corridor, he said. Leave us. They cleared. Vess moved toward the door. I will give you. Stay, Drav said. You should hear this. You have been part of this story without knowing it, and you deserve to know the part you've been part of. Vess stayed. Drav looked at Tal. He looked at him with the expression of a man about to put down something he had been carrying for 2 years, understanding that putting it down would be a relief, and understanding simultaneously that the putting down would cost something too, because that was the nature of secrets held long enough. They became load-bearing, and removing them changed the structure of everything they had been supporting. Tal Hart, he said, what I am about to tell you is the truth I should have told you from the beginning. I did not tell you from the beginning because I was a coward, and because I convinced myself that protecting you was the same as protecting myself, which is the lie that cowards tell most effectively. The nursery was quiet, the twins breathed, the silver patterns shifted in their sleep. Tal held them and waited. Your wife, Drav said, did not come to Valdris 2 years ago for the first time. The story has ended.